Hello and welcome to an interview with Bishop Joseph Brennan. Bishop, I had a great joy to interview you in June. So much has happened since then in the diocese. But today we wanted to focus on only about a week in January of 2020. There was the wonderful convocation with the priests and deacons, followed up by a visit for the ad limina trip to Rome to see Pope Francis. What did you want to tell us about the convocation?
Well, it was an extraordinary gathering and part of a whole extraordinary month, a beautiful beginning to a brand new year. But that very word, convocation, to call people together, and it was marvelous because it was a gathering, a calling together of the presbyterate, the priests of the Diocese of Fresno, and all of the deacons, whoever could show up, active or even retired. It was marvelous and extraordinary because it can only happen in a place like the Diocese of Fresno.
So what would have been, I know the topic was very, very interesting. The theology of ministry, joyfully living ordained ministry in a drifting church. Father Martin had a tremendously challenging and timely topic. How did that land on yourself and the priests and the deacons?
Well, I'll tell you, it landed beautifully upon us because I think it was a message that we certainly needed to hear, we're yearning to hear, and it was a riff on a theme from our Holy Father, Pope Francis, beginning with the joy of the Gospels, and how to live this consecrated, ordained, hands-on pastoral ministry and to do it joyfully. And as Father Martin indicated too, in the midst of immense challenges, not so much a drifting church, I think, as drifting people within the church. And we're finding our way in the midst of very challenging times. And I know the priests and deacons, in some ways, on the front line, so to speak, being on the receiving end of whatever might be going on in the larger, for lack of a better term, dominant culture around us. I know they work really hard and they sometimes feel put upon, and they need it, and I need it, to hear just this optimistic message of joy and the encouragement to live our priestly life and our diaconate life joyfully.
So it was your first convocation, and even unique for, in your own life, this idea of having this chance to have brother priests and deacons joining. What was the probably most important or the most significant part of the experience, Bishop?
Well, for me, it was toward the end as things developed and evolved, and what was, I think, symbolic of that, a deeper change, was how people were sitting with each other. That is, priests and deacons beginning to mingle toward the end of the week. Whereas, and this is natural, as most human groups and institutions do this, you gravitate toward your comfort zone, you gravitate toward the people you know, and then if you don't know them, you gravitate toward your group, like deacon or priest. And naturally, a lot of that was going on at the beginning. And I wouldn't say that we completely meshed or totally meshed, but I think it's just a lovely beginning. I had a sense that the deacons felt received into this larger kind of vision of what it means to be a priest, that we share, all of us, in the ministry of the Holy Father and the ministry of the local bishop. And that really was a wonderful way, really wonderful, to lead myself in particular into another extraordinary week, which was the ad limina visit. Yeah.
The last thing about the convocation that I was looking at the notes, there seemed to be a real emphasis or a real chance to discuss and feel about the crisis with the clergy abuse, that it was not off point, it was on point. How was that incorporated into Father's work
It was,
and
oh.
the response of the clergy.
It was so beautiful and so personal and so vulnerable on the part of Father Martin, who shared with us the fact that he had been abused as a little boy, an altar boy, somewhere on the East Coast. He didn't go into details, and we really shouldn't anyway. But here was a man who had gone through that horrible, horrible experience, a true victim survivor. But he doesn't call himself a victim, he just calls himself a survivor. This is a man who worked through that somehow. Now, I don't know how he did it. I don't think everybody can do it. I think very few people, true victim survivors of that kind of abuse, can do it. But he managed, and he has a narrative to tell, a story to tell, and it was very powerful. And it wasn't like he was saying, well, if I can do this, anybody can. No, he was just saying, by the grace of God, I was able to somehow work through it. And I love this church that is broken. I love this church that can sometimes have members within it that hurt in that way. But I know there's a deeper story and a more powerful narrative that grace does triumph, that goodness does triumph over evil. Yeah, it was powerful.
I am so grateful that you shared that part of Father Martin. I would have just thought, what a capable person from his own resume, but to know how deeply he shared. And that must have elicited a real response from the clergy to know someone can be that vulnerable.
Well, the first response was silence, sacred silence, not dumbfounded, but just moved that someone would be that vulnerable with relative strangers. But when you share priesthood, when you share diaconate, quite frankly, it really is this deep and abiding brotherhood, and there ought not to be strangers among us. It still happens, but he brought that out of us in a beautiful way. The convocation was powerful.
It sounds like the last point. What would be your hope, building on that positive experience in early January? Where do you see it moving for the rest of the year?
I see it just strengthening the bonds between the priests, the pastors, and their deacons, and their wives, who loom large in the life and ministry of a deacon. And just to strengthen those bonds, because yes, the convocation was about being in union with each other and in union with the local guy who wears this pectoral cross.
Speaking of pectoral cross, the next thing we wanted to talk about is your first visit as the shepherd of our diocese, joining with your brother bishops from California for the ad limina visit with Pope Francis. So I'm wondering, what would have been the preparation? How did you enjoy prepping with finding out about the diocese and its report? And how was that for you, prepping?
Well, I had the easy part. I dragged to Rome the report. It's called the quinquennial report, which comes from the Latin word for 5. So basically every 5 years, every bishop all over the world is to make a report and to bring the quinquennial report, although we forward a copy months in advance. And on the cover page it says, prepared by Bishop Joseph Brennan and Bishop Armando Ochoa.
Absolutely.
Well, I love taking credit that I don't deserve, because I get blame I don't deserve, so I'll take both. But I got a kick out of it, because my literal preparation and participation in that was just going to a few meetings that were already lined up with some wonderful people here at the Chancery, and just kind of an observer, seeing the immense work, the detail that went into that, making that report. And I simply had to write a bishop's summary toward the end, and kind of a very generic state of the diocese document at the end. So that was my part. I did bring it with me though, and not really realizing I probably didn't have to drag that all the way there, because they already had copies. And the Pope didn't ask me any questions. I was cramming like I did back in college.
bet.
I thought I better be familiar with all of these statistics and some of the vital data and statistics from the diocese. So I went through it. I underlined. I put stars where I thought something was important, and he didn't ask me anything about it.
It was wonderful prepping on that committee. It was really great. And then when
Yes.
you arrived and then knew that you'd be the one leading us there with, you had your loyal assistant there also.
I did.
Monsignor Dreiling. And
Monsignor
then
Dreiling.
Bishop Ochoa, of course. How was it being with your brother bishops and Monsignor Ray in the mix with the contingent from California?
For me, it was a continuation of the convocation, where it's about being in communion, being united with each other, and now being in communion with Rome, with the Holy Father, being united with him, which was one of his great themes during the sharing that we had with him. So I just felt a real kindred spirit with, even more so now, with Monsignor and Bishop Ochoa, and then with the fellow bishops from the Region 11, which was California, Nevada, and Hawaii, believe it or not.
How did you, let's say, spend your time while you were there that week? The meetings, how were they conducted? How was it, Bishop?
Well, I spent most of my time getting over the jet lag. No, it was hard. I don't know why it's hard for me to get over jet lag going in that direction. But in the midst of the jet lag, all kidding aside, our time was spoken for the most part. In fact, we were very busy from morning, noon, and night. First day was the highlight because in the midst of the jet lag, we all got up early and got dressed in our finery, what would be called the house cassock, the black cassock with the shoulder cape and the suquero. We were dressed to the nines to go to St. Peter's Basilica, because that's one of the major requirements for an ad limina visit. Ad limina apostolorum, literally to the threshold or to the house or door of the apostles. So 3 requirements. You meet the Pope and give him a report. You visit and pray at the basilica or the burial site of St. Peter. And then you visit and pray at the burial site of St. Paul. So those are the 3 requirements from centuries ago. And it's changed over time, and it changes with each Pope. It's much more personal with Pope Francis, as you might guess. That's not a surprise. And it was very much a teaching moment. So we had Mass on the first day at the crypt of St. Peter's Basilica. At the crypt of St. Peter, my former boss, actually my current boss in a sense, because he's the Metropolitan of our region, Archbishop Jose Gomez, presided and preached, getting us started beautifully about this connection with a flawed and broken man named Peter, who was called to be the head of the church, and how the apostles shared that apostolic tradition and blessing, and how bishops are successors to the apostles, and how important it is to be united with each other, respectful of each other, and in communion with Rome. And that's whoever happens to be in the chair of St. Peter. And right now it happens to be Francis. And Francis was wonderful. He gave us 3 hours. Through the rest of the week, when we went to different department, they call them dicasteries, but they're department meetings and meetings with congregations, like the Congregation for the Doctrine and the Faith, for example. At every meeting, they marveled, because they get reports about how our meeting went with the Pope. They marveled that he spent 3 hours with us. It was the most time he spent with any group. And it wasn't like it was 3 hours of being lectured, or scolded, not at all. Let me tell you how he started. He began, I'll have to paraphrase it because I can't remember the exact words, but it was the most warm and sincere invitation to dialogue with him. I do remember him saying, and I can use his exact words, "I want you to be completely free. We are brothers here. I want you to ask me anything, and I will do my best to answer." And then he framed it for us in about a half an hour of just beautiful teaching, preaching really, but not preaching at us, preaching in a beautiful way and setting the stage for what happened. It turned into literal dialogue, question and answer. His answers were thorough, they were beautiful, they were profound, and appreciated by everybody.
In Spanish or Italian or
He
what?
spoke in Italian, he did, and then we had a simultaneous live translator there. Some poor Monsignor, I think it was from South Africa, and I say poor because after 3 hours he was wiped.
Oh.
He was wiped out. And I'll tell you something, another extraordinary thing. The Pope came in tired. He looked like maybe he'd had a sleepless night, and he'd gotten his day had clearly started very early, and you don't know what the backstory was, but you can bet that it was not easy. So he comes and he looks tired, and by the end of the 3 hours, he's totally energized.
My!
Yeah, no, he clearly derives energy from the interchange and the dialogue and from being with people. Yes, so that was good. We didn't depress him.
Obviously not. Now, is it that it was done very much as a conference, or do dioceses have a bit of a separate time or a separate, like now it's Fresno, now it's LA, now it's San Francisco, or it's the conference?
It's different than how it was done in the past. For example, I have to do reverse engineering because this was my first ad limina, but I've asked, and evidently, for example, under St. John Paul, he would meet with every bishop for about 8 to 10 minutes, one-on-one, and actually would ask a few things from the quinquennial report. Pope Francis doesn't do that. He wanted it to be more of an open dialogue with all of us, and whoever had a question could ask a question about anything. So after his opening statement, we asked questions, and it just went on for about 3 hours beautifully.
What might have been something, Bishop, in that 2.5 hours of your brother bishops with Pope Francis, something that surfaced, something someone asked, something he said, something that became like, yeah, we stayed on that for a bit too, issue, topic?
Yes. Certainly the abuse scandal. I mean, we asked for just some prayer, and we asked for some fatherly advice, if he could give it, in terms of how to deliver a message of hope to our people, a hope to the victim survivors. He addressed the issue of priests being accused and being under a dark cloud, some being exonerated subsequently, and how to deal with that, and how you go about restoring a reputation that's been damaged and hurt on that level. But the emphasis clearly was and should be a church that is in need of repentance, yes, for hurt really done to real victims. And that was wonderful to hear that. On another very different level, one of our bishops shared very personally about the experience of suicide in his own family, and talked very vulnerably about his own family experience and the background of it and the experience of it. The Holy Father listened so attentively, and at the end of this bishop's question, plea really, he asked the Holy Father to consider writing an apostolic exhortation or some kind of document just dealing with that whole issue of, because it's a life issue, it certainly is.
Yeah.
And maybe it's more of a first world experience or problem than it might be in other parts of the world. But it's certainly, I think, endemic to, yes, the developed world and the affluent world. And the Pope was very tender. He said, I would certainly consider that. And he said, I'd never really thought of that. So he's so open that stuck out in a very, very big way. Yeah.
What may have been, Bishop, the biggest surprise, the biggest, I did not see that coming, or I did not know they did that here, or this is interesting. Wow, something that was maybe not in your expectation.
Well, one, I expected the Pope to engage in dialogue. I did not expect cardinals in the dicasteries or the congregations to engage in dialogue. And quite frankly, a few of them did not. And that's fine. They were there to lecture a little bit. But in days past, again, from inquiring, there were times when the ad limina visit did consist of simply going to the meetings after your meeting with the Pope and simply being talked to.
Wow.
I was pleasantly surprised, and I'll give him, I'm going to call him out, this Cardinal Stella, in a beautiful way, at the Congregation for the Clergy. And he was so open to what we had to say,
Nice.
and so concerned about the state of clergy in the United States, and I found it so refreshing. Yeah, it was great. That was wonderful.
What could have been one or two like high points that actually those moments they were just the moment. It was just that experience. One or two where there just something off the chart that was just, you just can't get over that happened. I was there. I saw this.
It wasn't on the tour, our tour, but I went on a tour of the excavations under St. Peter's. I had, Saturday morning was a travel day, but my flight was it was scheduled later, which was wonderful. So there's a friend of mine, Monsignor Lawrence Spiteri, of the Archdiocese of Los Angeles, who's been on loan to the Holy See for the past 15, 16 years as a specialist in canon law and in civil law, I think even specifically Italian civil law. So he's a great help to the Pope, and it's a generous, very generous gesture on the part of the Archdiocese of Los Angeles to have him on loan for that long. And Monsignor Spiteri finagled a couple of tickets for himself and myself to go beneath St. Peter's. So you are literally beneath where the cupola inside the church is, and it is, we believe, the actual burial site of St. Peter, the original site designated by the Emperor Constantine. And here we're walking through Roman roads that are over 2,000 years old, and they've been excavated. And it had been a cemetery even before that. And then by a small opening in a cave-like structure with remnants from a very tiny shrine, believe it or not, a very tiny shrine that had been mandated by the Emperor Constantine to honor the remains of St. Peter. So I thought, okay, this is it. This is ground zero. This is where he died. This is where he was buried. This is where he preached his last sermons. And this is where this worldwide, beautiful communion of faith and communion of saints really started. That blew my socks off. I didn't expect that. Yeah.
Is there any response that was given to the report? Like, was there information given back to you as if they acknowledged something, or do you see that there's a direction to the diocese based on what was learned and experienced and what you did during the ad limina?
There were only really oblique references to any one of our quinquennial reports. And since it's, for me, from almost the outside looking in, since I didn't have that day-to-day participation in the preparation of the report, full disclosure, I already admitted that, okay?
But it was a great report.
And it was. I think they saw it as I see it, as a snapshot of the diocese from the past 7 years, since the quinquennial, the ad limina, was a little overdue. So it wasn't like meant to be a strategic plan, certainly, but it could lead to that. And I think certainly a very accurate snapshot of who we are and where we're at right now, and what is happening in the diocese, not just as a church, but as, I mean, there were statistics about poverty in there and all kinds of things that pertain to our experience here in the Central Valley. Yeah.
Did you by any chance get to see this thing I heard on NPR about the Palace of the Poor, that Pope Francis has taken over this very swanky palazzo? And what he did is make it be that once the sisters left, it's now a home for 50 homeless people. It's amazing, I think, what the Pope has done, and I'm wondering if any of what he's doing with building things for the homeless, or what he's doing with showers, is now seen in any of your travels.
Well, I didn't see it, but there was a buzz about it, so I'd heard about it, and when you get there, you hear about it as well. So I'll have to put that on my itinerary.
On the next trip.
Well, actually, I'm going to Rome again in May, so I'm going to look that up.
Super.
And it's not official business. It's to celebrate the 25th anniversary of my singing partner, Anna Betancourt, and her husband, Mike, whose wedding I officiated at 25 years ago. I taught him how to be an altar server. I remember her when she had to sit on a booster chair to play the organ in the church, and she became this beautiful musician and marvelous singer. So I'm going there to celebrate that and to anticipate my own 40th anniversary as a priest, which would be in June. So I'm going back to Rome, and now I'm going to have to add something to our itinerary.
Is there anything that between the convocation and the ad limina visit, anything else that you did want to share with the diocese as we wrap up this conversation over these 2 January 2020 events, what they were and what they bode for the diocese moving forward?
Well, yes, just this overwhelming, wonderful sense of belonging to something bigger than yourself, and belonging to something that has this marvelous mixture of peoples and cultures and languages coming together literally in one family, that we're not lone rangers in any sense of the term. So from the convocation to the ad limina to returning home, there was a synergy to it for me. It was like pastors ought not to see themselves as owners of a franchise, that they've somehow bought in, but they're somehow independent. No, we're in this together, and in union with your bishop, who is in union with Rome, who comes back from Rome to be in union with that and this, here and there. That is, it's come together for me in a way that I'd never really experienced before.
I have to add one more thing, only because you, in your absence, have been very present to people. The letters that you've written about the census, which is really one more place where we see the unity of people. Each person counts. It's like a major pro-life issue, is having people dignified by the fact that they can be in the census. Faith in the Valley was celebrated for its connection with the Diocese of Fresno because of your letters, and when we had a meeting, we were able to do this while you were in Rome. We were able to let the whole valley know that the Diocese of Fresno is totally committed to having people confident and secure in participating in Census 2020.
I love that, because it's just, most good things happen without me anyway.
But it was your letter. They are so grateful. The Fresno 2020 Complete Count Committee just wants to thank you, and for all the initiatives that you're doing that engage the greater community. Because when we think of Pope Francis, we think of a big heart reaching out to everybody. So thank you for being our big heart and reaching out beyond what would be our own Catholic diocese.
Thank you, Jim.
Thank you,
Pleasure.
Bishop. Pleasure.
Thank you.
God bless.